Sir, if you close your eyes now, you might not wake up. The words came out of a little black girl's mouth in a cloud of white breath, thin and shaking in the dark, but the night swallowed nothing. Amina Brooks was only 9 years old, standing ankle-deep in snow on the side of a back road outside Asheville, North Carolina, her small hand slapping against the frozen window of a black SUV that looked too expensive to belong anywhere near her neighborhood, to the Bent Street sign. She knew the road by memory because the streetlights out here missed as much as they helped. Then she saw it, a smear of black against the snowbank, too still, too wrong. At first she thought it was just another abandoned car. People left things out here all the time. Broken furniture, flat tires, empty bottles. But then the hazard lights blinked once, and everything in her changed direction. Now she was here, face to face with a stranger whose watch probably cost more than her grandmother's rent for a year, and none of that mattered because his lips were turning the wrong color and his hands weren't moving. The man tried to say something, but it came out weak, like his voice had frozen before reaching the air. Amina yanked at the door handle. Locked. She moved around the vehicle, boots slipping, breath catching, and tried the passenger side. Also locked. Through the tinted glass, she could see leather seats, a cracked phone screen glowing faintly in the cup holder, and snow already creeping over the hood in soft white layers. The storm was swallowing the whole car inch by inch. Okay, she whispered, more to herself than to him, forcing her voice to stay steady the way her grandma always did when the lights went out. Okay, you stay awake. I'm right here. Then she reached up, unwound her purple scarf from around her own neck, and held it through the slight opening at the top of the driver's side window, where the glass had not sealed all the way. It was not much. Just a narrow gap. Just enough for wind to snake through. Just enough for hope. The man looked at the scarf, then at her, and Amina saw it clearly in his face for the first time. Not pride, not wealth, not whatever men like him wore like armor in the daytime, but fear, cold and honest and human. And in that moment, under the hard hiss of falling snow, Amina Brooks understood something the world had taught her early. When trouble comes, it does not care how rich you are. It only cares who stays. Amina kept one hand pressed to the narrow gap in the window so the scarf would not blow away, and with the other she dug into the pocket of her coat until her fingers found the small packet of instant hot cocoa she had gotten free from the church pantry 3 days earlier. She had been saving it for her grandmother, for one of those nights when the cold pushed through the walls so hard it felt like the whole house was breathing ice. But the man inside the SUV was shaking now, not in big visible movements, but in the tiny, dangerous kind that made his jaw tighten and his eyelids sink. Listen to me, she said, lifting her chin the way Miss Loretta always did when she wanted to sound stronger than she felt. You cannot go quiet on me. You have to answer when I talk. The man blinked slowly, as if even that cost him something. His breath fogged the inside of the glass. Up close, Amina could see he was older than she first thought, maybe in his 50s, with silver at his temples and tired lines cut deep around his mouth. He did not look like the smiling men on billboards downtown, the ones in polished suits who promised to change the future. He looked worn out, human, cold in a way money could not fix. What is your name? She asked. He swallowed, then managed, Grant. His voice was rough and thin. Amina nodded fast, relieved by the sound of it. Good. That is good. My name is Amina. So now we know each other. And that means you have to keep talking. She tore the cocoa packet open with her teeth, then laughed once under her breath at herself, because that had been a silly idea. No cup, no hot water, nothing but wind and snow and a rich stranger trapped in a machine that was slowly disappearing under white. Still, she held the packet up through the crack in the window. It is all I got, she said. It smells like chocolate. That has to count for something. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough to warm something in her chest. You should be home, he murmured. So should you, she shot back, and this time the almost smile stayed a second longer. The storm groaned through the pine trees lining the road. Somewhere in the dark, branches creaked under the weight of fresh snow. Amina looked over her shoulder. No headlights. No houses close enough to help. Quickly, just the long stretch of road and the pale blur of the world vanishing inch by inch. She knew this kind of cold, not from cars like this or coats like his, but from the draft that slipped under the back door every winter From mornings when the sink water came out sharp enough to sting, from watching her grandmother rub warmth into stiff fingers before trying to button a sweater. Miss Loretta always said cold was sneaky. It did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it made you sleepy first. Amina leaned closer to the gap. Grant, tell me what color my scarf is. He stared at her, confused. What? The scarf, she said firmly. Tell me the color. His eyes tried to focus. Purple. Good. Now tell me what I was carrying when I found you. He looked at the paper bag tucked under her arm, damp now around the edges. Groceries. Soup, she corrected. And medicine. For my grandma. Now tell me how many fingers I am holding up. She raised 3 fingers and pressed them to the glass. He squinted. 3. See, she said quickly. You are still in there. The wind surged again, tossing snow across her face so hard she had to shut one eye. Her sneakers were soaked through. Her toes had gone from aching to numb. That scared her more than she wanted to admit. But every time she thought about running for help and leaving him alone, she pictured his eyes closing for good and the car becoming just another dark shape buried by morning. So she stayed. I need you to do something else, she said. I need you to keep your hands moving. Tap on the wheel. Like this. She slapped her mitten lightly against the door in a quick rhythm. Tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. He watched her, then lifted one hand from the steering wheel and tapped weakly with 2 fingers. That is right, she said. Keep doing that. My grandma says the body listens when you give it a job. A long silence followed, but it was not empty. It was filled with the soft ticking of hazard lights, the hiss of snow, the faint sound of his fingers tapping against leather because a 9-year-old girl in a worn coat had told him to. Then Grant looked at her again, more awake now, more present, and asked the question in a voice full of disbelief. Why did you stop? Amina frowned. What do you mean? His eyes moved past her shoulder, out toward the road, toward the storm, toward whatever life he had come from before this moment. Most people, he said slowly, would have kept walking. For a second she did not answer. She thought of her grandmother waiting at home, of the cold soup cans in the bag, of the dark duplex with the crooked porch light, of the way the world so often passed by people without seeing them at all. Then she looked back at him through the thin crack in the glass and said, simple and plain, I know what it feels like when nobody stops. Grant did not answer right away. The question seemed to settle somewhere deep behind his eyes, as if it had landed in a place he had not visited in a long time. Snow kept gathering along the edges of the windshield, feathering the glass in white, and the orange hazard lights continued their weak pulse against the storm. Amina shifted on her feet and felt the cold water inside her sneakers move against her socks. Her toes had gone dull. Her fingers hurt less now too, which she knew was not a good sign. But she kept her face steady because Miss Loretta always said panic was loud, and loud never solved anything. Grant, she said softly, then louder when his gaze drifted again. Stay with me. He blinked and looked back at her. I am here, he said, but the words came slow, dragged through exhaustion. Amina glanced down the road once more. Still nothing. No headlights. No engine sound. No passing truck. Just wind pushing curtains of snow across the pavement and the dark tree line bending like it had secrets. She knew she could not stand there forever. She needed help. Real help. Grown-up help. Someone with a phone that worked or a truck that could pull this one free. But every time she imagined leaving, even for a minute, something in her chest pulled tight. Listen, she said, pressing closer to the window gap. I am going to get somebody. His hand moved weakly on the wheel. No, the word was barely a breath. You have to, she said. I cannot dig out a whole car by myself, and I am only 9, so this is already a lot. That got another small flicker at the corner of his mouth. Barely there. But there. Amina took it as a victory. There are houses down the road, she continued. Not good ones. Just regular ones. But somebody has to be home. Grant's eyes closed for half a second too long. She knocked hard on the glass. No, do not do that. He forced them open again. They will not come, he murmured. You do not know that, she said. I know people. He looked at her strangely then, maybe because of the certainty in her voice, maybe because it was an unusual thing to hear from a child standing in a snowstorm with wet shoes and a coat too thin at the sleeves. Amina lifted her chin. I am serious. Keep tapping that wheel. Keep counting if you have to. Count to 50, then start over. If I come back and you are not counting, I am going to be very mad at you. Very mad, he asked, his voice dry and faint. Extremely, she said. The kind where I stop being nice. For the first time, his expression changed enough for her to see the man he must have been before the storm. Someone sharp, someone used to command rooms and make people listen. But it was softened now, worn down by cold and by the strange humility of needing a little girl to tell him how to stay awake. Amina, he said. Yes. Why are you out here alone? The question hit her harder than she expected. The paper bag under her arm had grown damp from the snow, the pharmacy receipt stuck to the side. She tightened her grip on it and shrugged, though she knew he could not see the whole motion through the frosted glass. Had to get medicine. At this hour? The fever came back after dinner. Grant frowned slightly, trying to follow. Your grandmother's? She nodded. Miss Loretta. She says she is fine every time she is not fine, and then she smiles like that changes the thermometer. The words came easier now, maybe because talking kept both of them from listening to the wind too much. The pharmacy on Tunnel Road was closing, and the church pantry gave us soup yesterday, so I figured I could carry both. It is only a mile and a half if you cut through the back road. She paused, then added in a smaller voice. It was supposed to be faster. Grant stared at her, really stared this time, taking in the wet curls stuck to her forehead, the frayed edge of her mitten, the purple scarf looped through the crack in his window, because she had given it away without hesitation. Something shifted in his face. Not pity. Something quieter. Respect, maybe. Or shame. A child should not have to do that, he said. Amina gave a tiny snort, a sound so small it nearly vanished in the storm. A lot of things should not happen. Then she turned and looked down the road again, making her decision before fear had a chance to argue with her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a broken pink lip balm tube, the cheap kind sold near the register. She crouched by the front tire and pushed it upright into the snowbank like a marker. Then she set the paper pharmacy bag beneath the side mirror where the wind would not take it. What are you doing? Grant asked. Making sure I can find you fast if the snow gets worse, she said. And leaving the medicine where I will not lose it. She straightened, wiped her wet hand on her coat, and leaned in one last time. Count, tap, and keep your eyes open. I am coming back. His lips parted like he wanted to say something more, something important, but what came out instead was simple and raw. Be careful. Amina held his gaze for one heartbeat, then two. You too, she said, which was a strange thing to say to a man trapped inside a luxury SUV while she was the one about to run into the storm. But somehow it felt right. Then she turned and began running through the snow, small legs pumping hard, breath tearing in and out of her chest, the road half invisible beneath her feet. Behind her, the hazard lights kept blinking through the white like a promise she had made and could not afford to break. Amina ran with her head down and her arms tight to her sides, the wind clawing at her coat like it wanted to turn her around. Snow packed into the seams of her sneakers and stung her ankles with every step. The road, which had felt familiar an hour ago, now looked strange under the storm, flattened into white and shadow, the ditches blurred, the mailbox posts wearing heavy caps of snow. She kept moving anyway, counting her breaths, because counting made fear smaller. At the first house, a faded ranch with a chain-link fence and a porch light flickering weakly above the door, she stumbled up the steps and knocked so hard her knuckles burned. Please, she shouted before anyone even answered. Please, there is a man stuck in a car down the road. Nothing. She knocked again, faster. The storm seemed to swallow the sound. Then at last the curtain twitched, just once, and an older man cracked the door 2 inches, warm yellow lights spilling over the threshold and onto Amina's wet face. His eyes narrowed at once. What are you doing out here, little girl? He asked. A car slid off the road. Amina said quickly, breathless, pointing back into the whiteness. A black SUV. The man inside is freezing. I need a phone. Or a truck. Or just somebody to come. The man frowned like her words were pieces that did not fit together right. He looked past her shoulder at the storm, then back at her thin coat and soaked shoes. You should be home, he said. Sir, I know that, Amina replied, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. But he cannot stay there. For a second she thought he might help. His hand tightened on the edge of the door. Then his shoulders sank with the heavy tiredness of someone who had spent too many years protecting his own small square of the world. Road is bad, he muttered. Can barely see 10 feet ahead. I am not driving anywhere in this mess. Then call 911, Amina said. Please. He hesitated again, longer this time, and Amina could feel the seconds slipping away like snow melt between fingers. Finally he nodded once, not warm, not kind exactly, but not cruel either. I will call, he said. Now go on home. Amina did not move. You promise? She asked. His face tightened, maybe from the question, maybe from being doubted by a child on his own porch. I said I will. She searched his eyes, trying to decide if his promise was solid or just something people said when they wanted discomfort. To go away. But there was no time to argue, and trust, even thin trust, was better than none. So she backed off the porch and ran again. The second house sat farther down, dark except for a blue television glow leaking through the front window. She banged on that door too, harder than before, and when a woman opened it with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, Amina launched into the story before she could be sent away. The woman listened with a face full of worry, then pressed one hand to her chest. Oh Lord, she whispered. Honey, come in first. You are shaking. No, ma'am, Amina said. I cannot stay. He is still there. The woman turned and shouted for her teenage son to bring the truck keys, but the boy appeared in the hallway already shaking his head. Mom, the truck's rear tire is low. You cannot take it out on ice like this. Then call, Amina said again. Everybody keeps telling me things. I need somebody to do them. The sharpness in her voice surprised even her, but the woman did not get offended. Instead, she hurried to the kitchen counter, grabbed a cordless phone, and started dialing with stiff fingers. What is the mile marker? She asked. Amina opened her mouth and froze. The road had no clear sign near the ditch, only trees, snow, and darkness. Her heart dropped for one hard second. Then she remembered the Bent Street sign and the old red barn she passed every time she came this way. She described both fast, along with the narrow shoulder and the black SUV buried nose first in the bank. The woman repeated it all to the dispatcher, voice growing steadier with each word. Relief should have come then, but it did not. Relief was too simple for nights like this. Amina knew calls could be made and still take too long. She knew roads could close. She knew help could get lost. She backed toward the door before the woman even hung up. Wait, the woman said, reaching for a wool hat hanging on a hook by the frame. At least take this. She crossed the room and pulled the hat gently over Amina's damp curls, then wrapped half a granola bar in a napkin and pressed it into her mitten. The gesture was so soft it nearly broke something in Amina's chest. Thank you, she whispered. Now go straight home, the woman said. But Amina was already shaking her head. I cannot. Honey, they are coming. Maybe, Amina said. But he is alone now. The woman stared at her, really stared, as if seeing not just a child but the stubborn shape of her heart. Then she stepped aside without another word. Amina turned back toward the storm, the borrowed hat warm on her head, the granola bar clenched in one fist, and ran once more into the white dark, following the memory of blinking hazard lights and the promise she had made to a man who had no reason left to believe strangers would return. By the time Amina saw the weak orange blink through the snow again, her lungs felt too small for the air she needed. The black SUV was almost buried to the doors now, its shape softer, quieter, as if the storm had started erasing proof that it had ever been there at all. For 1/6 second, she could not see movement inside, and fear hit her so fast it made her stumble. Grant, she shouted, slipping through the drift toward the driver's side. Grant, I came back. She slapped the glass with both mittens. No answer. Then, slowly, his hand lifted from the wheel and tapped once against it. Relief rushed through her, so hard it nearly made her dizzy. That is not enough, she said sharply, climbing onto the icy side rail again. You need to do better than one tap. We had a deal. His head turned toward her with visible effort, eyes unfocused at first, then steadier when he recognized her. The purple scarf still hung through the window gap where she had left it, fluttering in the wind like a small flag that refused to quit. You came back, he murmured. I said I would. Amina pressed closer to the window, her borrowed wool hat already catching snow along the brim. 2 houses. One man said he called. One lady really did call, I think. She sounded serious. So help is coming, but I do not know how long, and I do not trust time tonight. Grant watched her with an expression she could not quite name, something caught between disbelief and gratitude, and the strange humility of being forced to depend on a child. His face looked paler than before. Frost clung at the edges of his sideburns where the cold had crept in through the crack. Amina felt fear try to rise again, but she pushed it down and reached into her pocket. "Here," she said, unfolding the napkin with clumsy fingers and holding half the granola bar to the opening. "Take a bite." He stared at it, then at her. "You need that more than I do." "Maybe," she said. "But right now I need you not to act difficult." She pushed it toward him until at last he raised a shaking hand and broke off a piece. It was barely anything, just oats and sugar and a few chocolate chips crushed flat, but he chewed it slowly like it mattered. The sight of that, of a man in a tailored overcoat eating half a granola bar from a child's mitten in the middle of a snowstorm, felt so strange and so human that Amina almost smiled. "Almost. Good," she said. "Now keep chewing. Keep doing things." The wind shifted, carrying loose snow under her collar. She shivered hard and tucked her chin down, but she did not step away. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything." Grant's eyes drifted shut for a heartbeat, then opened again when she snapped her fingers against the glass. "No. Talk first. Sleep later." He drew in a thin breath. "I was at a dinner." "What kind of dinner?" "The kind where nobody eats much and everyone pretends they are listening." Amina frowned. "That sounds terrible." It surprised a short laugh out of him, soft and dry and almost swallowed by the storm. "It was not my favorite." "Then why go?" she asked. "Because people expect me to." "Who are people?" Grant looked past her for a second, toward a life far warmer and brighter than this road. "Board members, reporters, investors, people who say my name before they say hello." Amina thought about that, snow collecting on her eyelashes. "That sounds lonely too." He looked back at her then, really looked, and she knew she had landed on something true. For a moment neither of them spoke. The hazard lights blinked. The wind hissed. Somewhere in the trees, ice crackled softly like glass cooling. Then Grant asked, in a voice quieter than before, "How old are you?" 9. His brow tightened. 9. He repeated, as if that number changed the shape of the night. "And you are out here, keeping a stranger alive." Amina shrugged, though it made her shoulders ache. "I am also late getting home, and my grandma is going to worry herself into a whole lecture if I ever make it there." Grant's gaze dropped to the damp pharmacy bag still lodged beneath the mirror where she had left it. "The medicine," he said. "For her fever." "Yes. And you stayed anyway." Amina looked at him through the narrow opening in the glass, at the cold fear still sitting in his face no matter how hard he tried to hide it, and answered with the simple honesty children still had when the world had not talked all the softness out of them. "My grandma is sick," she said, "but she is not alone." "You were." The words settled between them heavier than the snow. Grant looked away first. His jaw moved once, tight, and when he spoke again his voice had changed. Less distant, less polished. "My daughter was 9 when she used to wait up for me," he said. Amina stilled. "You have a daughter?" He nodded faintly. "Had. She is grown now. Lives in Seattle. We do not talk much." The confession came out like it surprised him too, like the storm had stripped away the part of him that usually chose what to reveal. Amina did not know exactly what to say to that, so she said the thing that felt true. "Maybe you should." He stared at her. Then he gave the smallest nod, as if a child on a frozen roadside had just told him something no one else had dared to. Before either of them could say more, a distant sound rose through the storm at last, faint but real, a siren somewhere far off, cutting through the wind like a red thread being pulled through dark cloth. Amina turned toward it so fast her hat nearly slid off. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "You hear that?" she shouted. Grant closed his eyes for only half a second this time, listening, and when he opened them again there was something new in them, fragile but unmistakable. Hope. The siren came and went with the wind at first, fading so badly Amina wondered if she had imagined it. But then it rose again, clearer this time, distant yet real, threading through the trees and across the white dark like something sent just for them. She pressed both mittens to the frozen window and let out a breath that shook all the way down to her ribs. "They are coming," she said, though she was saying it as much for herself as for Grant. His eyes stayed on her face, heavy but more awake now, as if hope itself had weight and he was trying to hold it. The orange hazard lights kept blinking against the storm, weaker than before, but still there. Amina turned toward the road, straining to see through the curtain of snow. No lights yet. No shape of a truck. Just the sound, thin and far away. Do not get excited too fast, she muttered under her breath, repeating one of Miss Loretta's favorite warnings, then looked back at him. You still have to work. Grant's lips moved. Yes, ma'am. The answer was so soft and so unexpectedly obedient that Amina almost laughed. Instead, she nodded in approval, then rubbed her hands hard against her coat sleeves because feeling had begun to creep back into her fingers in sharp little stings. The borrowed hat sat warm and damp over her curls, and the purple scarf still bridged the small gap in the window, a thread between them. Keep tapping, she said, and tell me something else. His hand rose and fell weakly against the wheel. Tap, tap, pause, tap. What do you want to hear? He asked. Amina thought about it. Snow settled on her shoulders, on the window ledge, on the side mirror where the pharmacy bag still hid beneath the drift. Tell me about your daughter, she said at last. The question seemed to surprise him. He blinked once, then looked past her, not into the storm, but somewhere farther back. Her name is Claire, he said. She used to love winter when she was little. Not the driving part. The first snow. She would stand at the window in pajamas and wait for it like it was a parade. Amina listened without moving. His voice had changed when he said her name. It had become less like a businessman's voice and more like something older and softer, something that had not been used in a while. Did you build snowmen? She asked. Once, he said. Bad ones. Only once. He gave the faintest lift. Of one shoulder. I worked a lot. Amina frowned. That is a bad excuse. Grant looked at her again. I know. The honesty of it settled into the cold air between them. No defense. No polished explanation. Just two words. I know. Amina thought of her own grandmother waiting at home, likely sitting up now no matter how sick she felt, listening for the porch steps, refusing to lie down until she heard the front door. My grandma says grown people always think there will be more time, she said. Then they act shocked when time does not ask them first. Grant's hand stopped on the wheel for half a second. Your grandmother sounds wise. She is, Amina said. Also dramatic. That earned another breath of laughter from him, and this one lingered just long enough to warm the inside of the car's cold silence. Then the siren grew louder. Not much. Just enough that both of them heard it clearly this time. Amina spun back, toward the road. Through the storm, far down the shoulder, a faint wash of red flickered once against the snow, then disappeared, then came again. Her heart jumped so hard it hurt. There, she shouted, pointing though he could barely see past the ice. There, do you see it? Grant squinted through the windshield, his breath fogging the glass. Maybe. That is not maybe. That is absolutely a light. She stepped off the rail and waved both arms high over her head, even though the rescue crew was still too far to notice a child-shaped blur beside a buried SUV. But motion felt better than standing still. Motion felt like belief. Hey, she yelled into the storm. Over here. The wind snatched half the sound away, but she kept shouting anyway. Red flashed again, brighter now, and beneath it came the deep growl of an engine fighting the road. Amina turned back to Grant, grinning before she even realized she was doing it. His face changed when he saw that grin. For the first time all night, the fear inside it loosened. Not gone. Just loosened. Enough. You stayed, he said, almost to himself. Amina frowned at that, because to her the answer had always been obvious. I told you I would. The engine sound came closer, then slowed. Tires crunched over packed snow somewhere beyond the bend. Another set of lights appeared behind. The first, pale and wide, probably a truck with chains, or maybe the sheriff's department. Amina started toward the road, then stopped herself and ran back to the window one more time. She pressed her mitten against the glass where his shoulder was just visible behind the frost. You hear me, she said. They are close now. You did it. Grant looked at her hand, then lifted his own and placed it weakly against the inside of the window, palm to palm with only cold glass between them. The gesture was small, barely anything, but it hit Amina in the chest with strange force, because for one still second the storm, the money, the road, all of it disappeared, and there was only one human being telling another without words that he had made it this far, because she refused to leave. Then bright lights washed over the snowbank at last, red and white and urgent, reflecting off the drifts in long trembling streaks. Voices carried through the wind. Doors slammed. Somebody shouted coordinates. Amina stepped back, blinking against the sudden glare, and for the first time since she had seen that dark shape in the ditch, her knees felt shaky enough to buckle. Relief was not soft the way people thought. Sometimes it hit like a wave. Sometimes it made the world tilt. She stood there in soaked sneakers and a borrowed hat, breathing hard, watching grown men in reflective jackets hurry toward the SUV with equipment and blankets and practiced hands. And none of them knew yet that the reason the man inside was still awake had been a 9-year-old girl with a purple scarf, half a granola bar, and a promise she had treated like law. The men in reflective jackets moved fast, their boots sinking deep into the shoulder as they reached the buried SUV, and everything after that happened in a blur of light and noise that felt too big for the quiet road Amina knew. One of them shouted to another over the wind. Another crouched by the driver's side window and spoke in the low, steady voice adults used when they wanted panic to stay outside the body. Amina stepped back farther, hugging her coat shut with both arms now that she no longer had to hold herself together by sheer will. Without the job of keeping Grant awake, the cold found her. All at once, it came rushing into her fingers, her knees, the wet cloth around her ankles. She began to shake so hard her teeth clicked. "Hey there," someone said, and Amina turned to see a woman in an emergency jacket kneeling down in front of her. Snow clung to the woman's shoulders and to the dark braid tucked beneath her knit cap. Her face was calm, kind, alert in the exact way Amina imagined nurses had to be. "Were you out here with him?" Amina nodded once. The woman's eyes flicked to the purple scarf caught in the half-open window, then back to Amina's soaked sneakers, the borrowed hat, the paper bag under the side mirror. In one quick glance, she understood more than most people ever did. "Honey," she said softly, "I need to get you warm." Amina opened her mouth to say she was fine, because that was what people in her family said first by reflex, but the words did not come out right. They came out shivery and thin. The woman did not wait for pride to make things harder. She pulled a thick silver emergency blanket from her pack and wrapped it around Amina's shoulders with practiced hands. The material crackled like stiff paper and held in warmth almost immediately. Amina had never felt anything like it. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Amina. I am Kelly." "You did a very brave thing tonight, Amina." The praise landed awkwardly. Too large. Too bright. Amina looked away toward the SUV where two men were working the frozen door. "Is he okay?" Kelly followed her gaze. "He has a good chance because he stayed awake." Amina swallowed. "I made him count." Kelly looked back at her, and for a second something passed across the woman's face that was almost disbelief, except softer, fuller, edged with admiration. "Did you now?" Amina nodded. "And tapping. On the wheel. That was smart." Amina did not know what to do with that either, so she tucked her hands deeper under the silver blanket and watched as the door finally gave. The sound it made was small, just a stiff release of frozen metal, but it seemed to crack the whole night open. One medic leaned into the car. Another steadied from behind. Grant's face appeared in the shifting light, pale and drawn, but awake. Still awake. Amina let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. Then Grant turned his head toward her. Through all the movement and red light and falling snow, he found her standing there wrapped in silver, small as a street lamp shadow, and his eyes held hers with startling clarity. There were 100 things people might have said in a moment like that. "Thank you. I owe you. Do not leave." But Grant Holloway did not say any of them. His mouth moved once, and even from a few feet away, Amina could read it. Claire. The name struck her as odd at first, until she remembered. His daughter. The one in Seattle. The one who used to wait at the window for snow. For a second, Amina thought he was confused from the cold, calling for someone else. But then he lifted one trembling hand just slightly toward her, and she understood he was not mistaking her for his daughter. He was remembering his daughter because of her. Remembering something warm, something unfinished, something he had let drift too far away. A strange ache moved through Amina's chest, too deep and too quiet to be called sadness. It felt more like seeing a locked room crack open from the inside. They eased Grant out carefully, wrapping blankets around him as soon as he cleared the door. He tried to look back again, but one of the paramedics was already guiding him toward the waiting vehicle. Another emergency truck had pulled in behind the first now, its headlights flattening the falling snow into white sheets of light. Somebody spoke into a radio. Somebody else carried a medical bag past Amina, so quickly the zipper tabs rattled. The whole road had turned busy, official, humming with purpose. And still, in the center of it, Amina stood very still. Kelly touched her shoulder. Do you have family nearby? Amina nodded. My grandma, Miss Loretta. At home. How far? A little over a mile. Kelly's brows rose. You walked that in this storm? Amina looked down. The question sounded more serious when an adult repeated it back. I had to get medicine. Kelly's gaze dropped to the paper bag under the mirror. For your grandmother? Yes. And after all this, you were still planning to carry it home? Amina shrugged under the crackling blanket. It is what I left with. Kelly looked at her for a long moment, then stood and called to one of the deputies near the truck. Marcus, she said, we are not letting this baby walk home. The deputy, a broad man with snow frosting the shoulders of his brown uniform, came over at once. He had gentle eyes and a tired face, the kind that looked trustworthy right away. You are Amina? He asked. She nodded. Then tonight you ride with us. She started to protest, something automatic rising up in her about not wanting trouble, not wanting attention, not wanting to be a burden to anyone. But before she could speak, the back doors of the ambulance opened, and Grant, half covered in blankets and framed by bright white light, turned his head one last time. He found her again through the storm and the motion and the distance. His lips parted, and this time the words reached her. Do not disappear, he said. Amina stood there, silver blanket rustling in the wind, the snow still falling around her like sifted salt, and for reasons she could not explain, those 3 words settled over her more heavily than the whole storm had. Deputy Marcus drove slowly through the storm with the heater turned high, one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting near the radio, as it crackled with clipped updates Amina could not fully follow. She sat in the back seat wrapped in the silver blanket, her damp sneakers placed carefully on a rubber mat so they would not soak everything else, the pharmacy bag on her lap, like something fragile and important. Snow drifted across the windshield in long white ribbons, and every few seconds the red and blue lights reflected off the road signs and bare branches, turning the whole world into flashes of color and ice. Amina should have felt safe now. The danger on the roadside was behind her. The man in the black SUV was with medics. The medicine for Miss Loretta was still dry enough to use. But her body had not caught up to any of that. Her hands still trembled. Her jaw still tightened every time the truck tires slid a little overpacked snow. You doing all right back there? Marcus asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Amina nodded out of habit, then stopped and shook her head instead. I do not know, she admitted. The honesty surprised both of them. Marcus gave one slow nod like that answer made sense. Fair enough, he said. Tonight was a lot. Amina looked out the window at the dark shape of pine trees rushing by, their branches bowed low with fresh snow. Is he going to live? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a second, choosing his words carefully. The medics said he was responsive when they got him loaded in. That is good. Very good. Because he stayed awake, Amina whispered. Because you kept him awake, Marcus corrected gently. The truck fell quiet after that except for the heater fan and the radio. Amina stared down at the folded napkin in her mitten, the one that had held the granola bar. A few crumbs still clung to it. Strange, the tiny things a night could leave behind. A scarf in a car window. A pink lip balm marker in the snow. Half a granola bar. 3 words spoken through ambulance light. Do not disappear. She did not know why those words stayed with her so strongly. Maybe because disappearing was something she understood. Not in the literal way. In the regular way. The way people overlooked kids in old coats. The way teachers sometimes rushed past quiet hands in class. The way grown people looked at her grandmother's neighborhood like it existed only when they needed to make a point on the news. Amina knew what it meant to be present and still not be seen. Yet tonight, in the middle of all that white and cold, a man whose name strangers probably recognized had looked straight at her and asked her not to vanish. The thought sat warm and strange inside her. When they turned onto her street, the road narrowed and the snow looked grayer, packed with tire tracks from old sedans and delivery vans. Porch lights glowed through frosted windows. Most of the duplexes were dark, but one front room lamp still burned at the far end of the block, yellow and stubborn against the night. Amina leaned forward before the truck had fully stopped. That is ours. Marcus parked at the curb and got out first, hurrying around to open her door before the wind could force its way in too hard. The silver blanket crackled as she climbed down, her legs stiff now that they had stopped moving. The cold hit her again, sharper after the warmth of the truck, but the sight of that porch light pulled her forward. Before she even reached the steps, the front door opened. Miss Loretta stood there in a faded housecoat under a heavy sweater, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other clutching the edge of the screen as though she had been holding that position for a long time. Her gray braids were tucked into a scarf, and worry had pulled her face tight around the mouth. "Amina Brooks," she said, not loudly, but with the kind of force only grandmothers could manage without raising their voice. Amina ran the last few feet and nearly dropped the pharmacy bag in the rush to reach her. Miss Loretta caught her first, one arm wrapping around her shoulders, the other pressing against the back of her head. She smelled like peppermint tea, vapor rub, and the clean cotton scent of blankets dried indoors. Amina had not realized how close she had been to tears until that moment. "I am sorry," she mumbled into the sweater. I know, baby," Miss Loretta whispered, though the words shook. "Lord, you are freezing." Marcus climbed the steps behind her and touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in greeting. He explained the storm, the stuck vehicle, the rescue, but only in careful pieces, as though he knew too much truth at once might overwhelm a woman already pale from fever. Miss Loretta listened with one hand still on Amina's shoulder. She did not interrupt until he finished. Then she looked down at her granddaughter, really looked, taking in the wet sneakers, the borrowed hat, the silver blanket, and whatever expression lived on a child's face after she had spent an hour standing between a stranger and the dark. Miss Loretta's own face changed then, moving past fear into something deeper and quieter. Pride, maybe, or sorrow that kindness so often asked too much from the small. "Thank you for bringing her home," she told Marcus. "She is the one folks should be thanking tonight," he replied. After he left, Miss Loretta guided Amina inside, shut the door against the storm, and locked it with a soft click. The little duplex was dim and warm in the uneven way poor homes sometimes were, one room heated better than the next, the kitchen linoleum cold while the old rug near the space heater held on to a little comfort. Amina set the medicine on the table, peeled off her soaked sneakers, and winced as feeling returned to her toes in sharp little needles. Miss Loretta took one look at her and said, "Bath first, story second." But when Amina glanced toward the dark window over the sink, where snow still traced the glass and the night beyond looked endless, she could not help wondering where Grant Holloway was now, whether he was under bright hospital lights or still hearing the storm in his head, and whether a man like that ever truly remembered the child who stood beside him when the world had gone white. The hot bath water had long gone gray around Amina's ankles by the time the shaking finally stopped. Not all at once, little by little. First her hands, then her jaw, then the deep trembling somewhere behind her ribs that no blanket could reach. Miss Loretta had washed her hair with careful fingers and wrapped her in the thickest towel they owned, then sat her near the space heater in clean socks and an old flannel nightshirt that hung nearly to her calves. The little duplex smelled of eucalyptus rub, canned chicken soup warming on the stove, and the faint metallic scent of wet snow melting off shoes by the door. Outside, the storm still scraped softly at the windows, but inside everything had narrowed down to smaller sounds. The click of a spoon against a mug, the hum of the heater, the old clock above the fridge ticking like it had no idea an entire life had nearly changed on a back road an hour earlier. Amina sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug of warm water and honey because Miss Loretta said hot tea this late would only keep her awake, though awake was exactly what Amina already was. "Now," Miss Loretta said, easing herself into the chair across from her, blanket over her lap and fever medicine finally swallowed. "Tell me the whole thing slow." So Amina did. She told it the way children tell the truth when they are too tired to decorate it, plain and exact and full of the details adults often miss. The weak hazard lights, the frozen window, the man's face behind the glass, the purple scarf, the counting, the old man at the first house who had promised to call, the woman at the second house who had really done it, the granola bar, the medics, the ambulance lights. Every now and then Miss Loretta would close her eyes for a second, not because she was sleepy, but because the picture was too much. When Amina got to the part where Grant had said, "Do not disappear," the older woman's expression changed. She looked down into her own mug for a long moment before speaking. "That is not a small thing for a grown person to say," she murmured. Amina frowned. "Why?" Miss Loretta lifted her eyes. Fever had softened them, but not dimmed them. "Because people only say that when they know they almost lost something." The words sat between them in the yellow kitchen light. Amina looked down at the wood grain of the table, following the nicks and scratches left by years of dishes and homework and unpaid bills opened too quickly. "He did not know me," she said. "Maybe not before tonight," Miss Loretta replied. "But sometimes a hard night lets people see faster than comfort ever does." Amina thought about that while steam rose from her mug in thin curls. She could still picture Grant's hand against the frozen window, lined up with hers through the glass. She could still hear the roughness in his voice when he said Claire. She did not understand everything about adults, especially wealthy ones who wore coats worth more than some people's rent, but she knew loneliness when it passed through a room. She had heard it in teachers when they stayed late too often, in church ladies after funerals, in her grandmother's voice when she thought Amina was asleep and spoke softly to old photographs. Grant had sounded like that. The next morning came late and gray. Snow lay thick over the yard, smoothing the broken edges of the steps and the rusted fence into something almost gentle. Amina woke to the smell of oatmeal, and the sore heaviness in her legs that comes after fear has finally left the body. For one sleepy second, she thought maybe the whole night had blurred into a dream. Then she saw the borrowed wool hat hanging from the back of a kitchen chair and remembered all of it at once. Miss Loretta was already dressed, wrapped in her housecoat and sweater, standing by the radio on the counter while the local station gave storm updates and road closures in a voice too cheerful for the weather. Nothing was said about a stranded black SUV. Nothing about a little girl on a county road. The world, as usual, had moved on without waiting for permission. Amina ate quietly, spoon scraping the bowl, while her grandmother watched her over the rim of a teacup. "You are not going to school today," Miss Loretta said. "The roads are bad anyway." Amina nodded, though part of her liked school for reasons she did not always say out loud. It was warm there. Predictable. The books smelled clean. But she was too tired to argue, and the thought of pulling wet shoes over tender feet made her want to stay right where she was. By noon the snow had eased into a thin white drift instead of a full storm. Neighbors came out to shovel in slow, resigned motions. Somebody across the street wrestled with a car that would not start. Around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, just 2 firm taps. Miss Loretta looked up from the couch, and Amina's heart kicked once for no reason she could explain. When she opened the door, Deputy Marcus stood on the porch with a paper bag from the pharmacy in one hand and Amina's purple scarf in the other, dry now but still creased where it had been caught in the car window. "Thought this belonged here," he said. Amina was on her feet before the sentence ended. She took the scarf with both hands, her fingers pausing over the familiar knit. For some reason, that simple return moved her more than she expected. It was proof. Proof the night had happened. Proof she had not imagined the strange bridge between 2 lives, so different they never should have touched. Marcus smiled down at her. "Also," he added, "the man from the road made it through the night." The room went still. Amina looked up slowly. "He is okay?" Marcus nodded. "Cold and tired, but okay." Relief came through her so fast it made her sit down again. Miss Loretta pressed a hand lightly to her shoulder. "Did he say anything else?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, then gave Amina a look that was gentle and curious at once. Only that when he was more awake, he kept asking if anyone got the name of the little girl with the purple scarf. He tipped his hat once, then turned to leave. Amina stood in the doorway long after he walked back to his cruiser, the scarf looped through her hands, the porch cold beneath her socks. Across the street, a shovel scraped concrete. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon. And yet something beneath all of it had shifted. Grant Holloway was alive. He remembered. And though Amina could not have explained why, she had the sudden, steady feeling that the storm had not finished with either of them yet. 3 days passed, and the storm left behind the kind of cold that stayed even after the sky cleared. Snow along the curbs turned gray at the edges. Icicles hung from gutters like glass teeth. Life on Amina's block went back to its ordinary rhythm, which was to say people still had rent due, cars that coughed before starting, and grocery bags that felt heavier than they looked. By Monday morning, Amina was back at school in her cleanest sweater, her purple scarf wrapped twice around her neck, the same one Deputy Marcus had returned. It still carried a faint scent of cold air and something sharper beneath it, maybe leather from the inside of the SUV, maybe just memory. She sat in class with her pencil moving over a math worksheet while her mind drifted to bright ambulance lights and a man's hand pressed weakly against a frozen window. The teacher asked for the answer to a fractions problem, and Amina gave it without looking up. She had always been good at school, not loud good, not hand in the air before the question ended good, but steady good. The kind teachers appreciated quietly and forgot publicly. At recess, 2 girls from her class talked about the snow day and whose power had gone out and whose uncle had skidded into a mailbox. Nobody mentioned the stranded SUV. Nobody mentioned a rescue on the county road. The world had already folded the story into one of those things that almost happened and then disappeared. Amina did not tell them, partly because she did not know how to talk about it without sounding strange, and partly because the most important things had never seemed to get bigger. When spoken aloud, they either stayed true or they did not. That afternoon, she walked home past wet snowbanks and dripping eaves, cutting carefully around the patches of black ice still hiding in the shade. Miss Loretta was feeling a little stronger and had even opened the curtains in the living room, which always felt like a sign the day had won. A pot of beans simmered on the stove. The little duplex smelled warm and honest. Amina hung up her backpack, set her library book on the table, and got started on spelling homework while her grandmother dozed lightly in the recliner with a blanket over her knees. The television murmured low in the background, one of those daytime shows where people smiled too brightly in perfect kitchens. Around 4 o'clock, the crawl at the bottom of the screen changed from weather updates to local business news. Amina barely glanced up at first. Then a familiar face appeared, trimmed and serious, framed beside a photograph of a sleek office tower in Charlotte. Grant Holloway. The caption under his image called him a major investor and founder of Holloway Venture Group. Amina sat straighter without meaning to. The anchor said he was recovering after a weather-related roadside incident during the weekend storm, and that company representatives had declined to provide further details. The segment moved on in less than 20 seconds. That was all. No mention of the girl who found him. No mention of counting, or a scarf, or a child standing in snow deeper than her ankles. Just his name, his company, his recovery, then a cheerful shift to rising fuel prices. Amina stared at the screen a second longer than necessary. That him? Miss Loretta asked without opening her eyes. Yes, Amina said. Her grandmother hummed once, not surprised. They always make men like that sound shinier on television than they do in person. Amina smiled faintly at that. He looked tired in person. Miss Loretta opened one eye and studied her. And human? Amina nodded. Yes. Her grandmother's gaze softened. That matters more. Tuesday passed, then Wednesday. Nothing happened. No cars. No phone calls. No mysterious letters. By Thursday, even Amina had begun to feel a little foolish for checking the window each time a vehicle slowed on their street. She did not do it on purpose. Her body just noticed engines now. Not because she expected luxury or miracles, but because some part of her had not quite stepped out of the storm. That evening, while she was helping Miss Loretta fold laundry still warm from the laundromat dryer, there came a knock at the door. Not Marcus this time. This knock was lighter, followed by another one a moment later, as if the person on the porch was polite enough to wait, but not used to waiting long. Miss Loretta gave Amina a look. Amina set down a stack of towels and opened the door halfway. A woman stood outside in a camel-colored coat with a wool scarf tucked neatly at the throat and gloves the color of cream. She was white, maybe in her 40s, with sleek dark hair pinned back and the kind of posture people had when they were accustomed to entering important rooms. Her shoes were not made for their street. That much Amina noticed right away. Neither was her coat. The woman's eyes flicked quickly over the narrow porch, the peeling paint near the railing, the patched screen door, and then landed on Amina with sharp, careful focus. Hello, she said. Her voice was warm, but it carried the practiced precision of someone who measured words before releasing them. I am looking for Amina Brooks. Amina did not answer immediately. Who are you? The woman seemed to approve of the caution. My name is Evelyn Price, she said. I work for Mr. Grant Holloway. At that, Miss Loretta rose from her chair inside and came to stand just behind Amina, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. "Can we help you?" she asked. Evelyn shifted her attention with immediate respect. "Yes, ma'am. I believe you can. Mr. Holloway asked me to come in person because he wanted to be absolutely certain we found the right little girl." Amina's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. The porch seemed suddenly too small for the moment. "Why?" she asked. Evelyn looked down at her, and something in the woman's expression softened just enough to reveal that this visit mattered to her too, not only as a job. "Because," she said, "he has not stopped talking about the child in the purple scarf since the night she kept him alive." Evelyn Price stepped inside only after Miss Loretta nodded once, and even then she moved with the careful awareness of someone entering a home that mattered. She did not make the mistake of looking around with pity. Amina noticed that right away. The woman took in the narrow living room, the crocheted blanket on the recliner, the stack of library books by the lamp, the little kitchen table with one chair repaired twice at the leg, but her face stayed respectful and still. Snowmelt darkened the edges of her expensive shoes as she stood near the door, gloves folded neatly in one hand. "Mr. Holloway wanted to come himself," she said. "The doctors would not allow it yet." Miss Loretta remained standing beside Amina, one hand warm and steady at the middle of her back. "So he sent you," she replied. Evelyn inclined her head. "Yes, ma'am. And he asked me to begin with gratitude before anything else." Her eyes dropped to Amina. "You saved his life." The sentence landed in the room with a softness that somehow made it heavier. Amina looked down at her socks on the worn rug. She had never liked hearing things made too big. Saved his life sounded like something from television, all dramatic music and bright lights. What she remembered was cold glass, a weak voice, a granola bar, and the fear of being too late. "I just stayed," she said quietly. Evelyn's expression changed then. Not much, just enough for warmth to show through the polish. "According to everyone who saw the scene afterward," she said, "staying was the part that mattered most." Miss Loretta gestured toward the couch. "You may sit, if you are here to talk like a person and not like a contract." To Amina's surprise, Evelyn smiled. Not a social smile. A real one, brief and human. "That sounds fair." She sat on the edge of the couch, back straight, coat still buttoned. Amina stayed standing at first, close to her grandmother, until Miss Loretta gave her a look that meant sit down and breathe. So she curled into the chair by the lamp with her purple scarf in her lap, fingers worrying one loose thread. Evelyn reached into the leather portfolio she carried and removed a thick cream envelope, but she did not hand it over yet. "Mr. Holloway has asked me to arrange a few things," she said carefully. "First, he would like to cover any medical care your grandmother may need right away. Second, he would like to repair anything in this house that has been making life harder than it should be. And third, he would like to meet you properly when his doctors clear him to travel." The room went so quiet Amina could hear the old refrigerator hum in the kitchen. Miss Loretta did not speak for several seconds. When she finally did, her voice was calm, but Amina recognized the caution tucked inside it. "That is generous," she said. "Too generous, maybe." Evelyn nodded as if she had expected resistance. "I understand why you would say that. Mr. Holloway expected it too. He told me to be very clear that this is not charity." Her gaze moved to Amina again. "He says this is gratitude, and that gratitude should have weight." Amina looked up. The phrase felt strange and beautiful in a way she could not quite explain. Gratitude should have weight. It sounded like something Miss Loretta might say after thinking on it for 3 days. "Why does he care so much?" she asked before she could stop herself. Evelyn went still. Not offended, just more honest. "Because the night of the storm did something to him," she said. "The doctors treated the cold. You touched something else." Miss Loretta's hand tightened once on the arm of her chair. Amina felt her own heartbeat in her throat. Evelyn continued, slower now, choosing truth over polish. "Mr. Holloway has lived a very large life for a long time, Amina. Important meetings. More money than most people can imagine. Homes in cities you have probably only seen on maps. But when he spoke about that night, none of that showed up in his voice. Only you did. A little girl standing in the snow telling him to keep counting. A child who had every reason to keep walking and did not." Amina stared at the scarf in her lap. The yarn blurred for a second, and she blinked hard. Across from her, Miss Loretta let out a slow breath. "You said he wants to meet her properly," she said. When Evelyn placed the cream envelope gently on the coffee table. Tomorrow afternoon, if that is acceptable. But there is one more thing. She hesitated, and for the first time since entering, some of her professional smoothness slipped. What surfaced underneath looked almost like disbelief. Mr. Holloway does not want to arrive quietly. Amina looked up. What does that mean? Evelyn's mouth curved very slightly. It means he has spent 3 days upsetting his staff by refusing every sensible suggestion they made. They offered a private thank you, a discreet check, flowers. He rejected all of it. Why? Amina asked. Evelyn held her gaze. Because he said the world is too practiced at overlooking girls like you. The sentence hit the room harder than any raised voice could have. Amina felt it in her chest, deep and sudden. Miss Loretta's face did not change much, but something sharpened in her eyes. Recognition, pain, pride, all braided together. Evelyn glanced toward the curtained window that faced the street, where the late afternoon light had already started fading blue. So tomorrow, she said, Mr. Holloway intends to come here in a way your whole neighborhood will see. He said if people watched him arrive in silence, they would only notice the cars. But if they saw him step out and bow his head before a 9-year-old girl, they might remember what dignity looks like. Amina could not speak. Outside, a car door shut somewhere down the block. A dog barked once. The world kept moving, ordinary and unaware, while inside the little duplex the air itself seemed to change shape. Evelyn rose slowly from the couch and smoothed one gloved hand over the front of her coat. I know this is a great deal to take in, she said. You do not need to answer everything tonight. I only needed you to know that tomorrow will not be small. She stepped toward the door, then paused and looked back at Amina one last time. One more thing, she added. Mr. Holloway asked me to tell you he found Claire's number yesterday. He has not called her yet. He says he is waiting until he can tell her the truth, which is that a little girl in a purple scarf reminded him what kind of father he once meant to be. After Evelyn left, the house stayed quiet for a long time. Miss Loretta did not rush to fill it. She simply came and sat beside Amina, both of them listening to the fading sound of an expensive car pulling away from a street where cars like that did not belong. At last, Amina looked up and asked in a voice barely above a whisper, what if tomorrow changes everything? Miss Loretta turned to her, fever pale but steady, and brushed one thumb over the child's cheek. Baby, she said softly, sometimes everything changes the moment somebody important finally tells the truth about what you were worth all along. The next day moved strangely, too slow in the morning and too fast after lunch. Amina spent the first half of it pretending she was not listening for engines every time a car passed the block. The little duplex had been cleaned twice already, not because it needed to impress anybody, but because Miss Loretta said anxious hands ought to be given useful work. So Amina dusted the windowsill, folded and refolded the throw blanket on the couch, and lined up the shoes by the door until even she had to admit they were lined up enough. Outside, the snow had begun to soften under a pale sun, turning the street into a mix of wet asphalt, packed white ridges, and shallow puddles that reflected the sky like broken mirrors. Around 1:30, neighbors started noticing. Curtains twitched. Front doors opened and closed. Miss Delia from across the street came out with no coat and a mug in her hand, even though the air still bit at the ears. Mr. Benton leaned on his shovel longer than his driveway required. Amina stood by the front window in her clean blue sweater and dark jeans, her purple scarf looped neatly at her neck, and felt the whole block shift into that quiet alertness people get when something unusual is approaching and they want to witness it before they understand it. Sit down for a minute, Miss Loretta said from the couch, though her own hands were folded too tightly over her cane for the command to sound casual. Amina obeyed for about 10 seconds, then stood again. At exactly 2:12, the first black car turned onto their street. It was long and glossy and absurdly polished for a road like theirs, its dark surface reflecting sagging porches, patched fences, and children's bicycles left on winter lawns. Then came another, and another. One after the next, sleek black sedans rolled slowly down the block in a line so deliberate and so out of place that even the dogs stopped barking. By the time the sixth one pulled up, people were fully outside now, coats half-buttoned, slippers on porches, phones in hands. The neighborhood did not get processions like this unless somebody important was lost or somebody rich had mistaken the address. Amina's heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Lord, Miss Loretta breathed, standing carefully with the help of her cane. He really meant it. The center car stopped directly in front of the duplex. Its engine quieted to a soft purr. For a second nothing happened, and that pause made the whole street lean forward. Then the rear door opened. Grant Holloway stepped out slowly, not with the sharp, commanding stride of a man arriving at a board meeting, but with the careful movement of someone still recovering, still aware of his own body in a new way. He wore a dark wool coat over a charcoal sweater, no tie, no performance. The cold had returned some color to his face, but he was thinner than he had probably been a week earlier, and there was something in his posture that had changed. Less steel, more honesty. Beside him, Evelyn Price emerged from the front passenger seat holding a folder and a look of quiet satisfaction that suggested the entire caravan had been her logistical headache and his stubborn idea. But no one was looking at her. Every eye on the street was fixed on the man who crossed the wet curb and turned not toward the richest house on the block, because there was no such thing here, but toward the narrow porch of Miss Loretta Brooks. Amina stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, suddenly too aware of everything at once. The chipped white paint near her fingers, the damp cold coming up through the porch boards, the purple scarf at her throat, the way her grandmother's breathing had gone shallow beside her. Grant stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. Really looked. No rush. No cameras shoved in front. No press. Just a man and a child on a winter afternoon with half a neighborhood holding its breath around them. "Hello, Amina," he said. His voice was stronger now, but it still carried the rough edge of the storm, as if some part of that night had stayed behind in it. "Hello," she answered softly. Grant's gaze moved to Miss Loretta, and he inclined his head with a respect so immediate and genuine that Ms. Delia across the street actually lowered her phone. "Miss Brooks," he said, "thank you for raising someone who did not walk away." Miss Loretta tightened her hand around the cane. "I raised her to see people," she replied. The rest was hers. Something flickered in Grant's face at that, something close to emotion and too private to name. Then, before anyone could mistake the moment for ceremony or money or spectacle alone, he did something the whole block would remember for years. He removed his gloves, tucked them into one coat pocket, and bent one knee to the damp porch step until he was looking up at Amina from her height, instead of down at her from his. It was not dramatic. It was not polished. It was simply right. The kind of gesture that tells the truth faster than speeches do. Amina saw her neighbors go still in the corners of her vision. She saw Ms. Delia's mouth fall open. She saw Mr. Benton lower his shovel entirely. Grant held her gaze and said, clear enough for the street to hear, "You saved my life." Amina's fingers curled against the doorframe. "I just stayed," she whispered, the same words she had said before, because they were still the truest ones she had. Grant gave a small, almost broken smile. "Yes," he said, "you did. And I need you to know that in a world full of people who had more power than you, more money than you, more comfort than you were the one who chose not to leave." The cold air sharpened everything. The wet street, the silver of melting snow along the curb, the quiet faces watching from porches that had seen too much and expected too little. Grant took a breath and continued, not as a businessman now, not as a public figure, but as a man stripped down to gratitude. "I have spent years being surrounded by people who knew my schedule, my title, my signature, my net worth. But when I was most afraid, none of that kept me awake. A little girl in a purple scarf did." Amina felt heat rise behind her eyes so fast she had to blink hard against it. Beside her, Miss Loretta's chin lifted just slightly, pride and ache standing side by side in her face. Evelyn stepped forward then and handed Grant the folder. He placed it gently on the porch rail without breaking eye contact with Amina. "Inside are the repairs for this house, medical coverage for your grandmother, and a school trust in your name," he said. A murmur rolled softly across the street, but Grant ignored it. "Those things matter," he said, "but they are not why I came this way. I came this way because some kindness deserves to arrive loudly enough that nobody can pretend they did not see it." The words settled over the block like fresh snow, quiet and undeniable. Amina looked past him for 1 second at the line of black cars glistening on her street like something from another world, then back at the man kneeling at her porch, and she understood all at once that this was not just about being thanked. It was about being witnessed. Fully, publicly, without being reduced, softened, or turned into a footnote beneath someone else's headline. Grant reached into his coat pocket and drew out his phone. The screen lit briefly in his palm. "One more thing," he said, his voice gentler now. "This morning, before I came here, I called my daughter." Grant held the phone in his bare hand for a moment, the screen dimming against the cold as the street stayed silent around him. Even the neighbors seemed to understand that whatever came next mattered in a different way than the cars or the folder or the promise of repaired walls. It mattered in the quiet places, in the places no one clapped for. He looked up at Amina, then at Miss Loretta, and the next breath he took seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. "She answered on the second ring," he said. "My daughter did not ask about the markets. She did not ask about my schedule. She asked if I was all right." His voice softened on the last two words, as if they still surprised him. "And for the first time in years, I did not give her the polished answer. I told her the truth. I told her I had been afraid. I told her I was alive because a 9-year-old girl stood in the snow and refused to let me disappear." The wet street shone under the winter light. Amina could hear a faucet dripping somewhere nearby, slow and steady, and the far-off clatter of somebody setting down a trash can 2 houses over. Small neighborhood sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet nothing about the moment felt ordinary anymore. Grant glanced at the phone in his hand and gave a faint, humbled smile. "Claire cried," he said. "Then she laughed at herself for crying. Then she told me she was coming to see me this weekend." He looked back at Amina. "So before I did anything else, before the meetings and the statements and all the things people like me usually hide behind, I wanted to come here and stand in front of you exactly as I am. Grateful, corrected, alive." Amina's throat felt tight. She pressed her fingers into the edge of the doorframe, feeling the rough paint beneath her nails. She was only 9, and yet the whole block seemed to be listening through her, listening to something bigger than her, but somehow passing through her all the same. Miss Loretta shifted her cane lightly on the porch boards. "Then say what you came to say," she murmured, not unkindly. Grant nodded once. He turned fully toward Amina, still kneeling, still eye level with her, and the truth in his face made him look younger and older at the same time. "Amina Brooks," he said, each word clear enough to settle into memory. "That night, you did not save a billionaire. You saved a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like, not just in his hands, in his life." A hush moved over the street. No one interrupted it. No one laughed. No one shifted impatiently. People who had spent years being rushed by bills and weather and disappointment simply stood still and let the sentence land. Amina looked at him and saw the storm still there in him, not as fear now, but as a border between the person he had been and the person he had chosen to become after surviving it. "I was just trying to help," she said softly. Grant's expression gentled. That is exactly why it mattered. He rose carefully then, one hand on the rail for balance, and Evelyn stepped forward with the folder still under her arm. But before she could speak, Miss Loretta lifted one hand slightly. The motion was small, but it carried enough dignity to pause everyone. She looked at Grant the way older women sometimes do when measuring not wealth, but character. "Money can fix a roof," she said. "It can buy medicine. It can smooth a lot of rough edges. But if you are truly grateful to this child, then do not just reward what she did. Remember what she showed you." Grant met her gaze without flinching. "I will," he said. Miss Loretta studied him for one more quiet second, then nodded as if accepting an answer in church. "Good." Evelyn handed over the folder, and this time Miss Loretta took it. Not greedily, not timidly, just firmly, like a woman who understood the difference between pity and provision. Behind Grant, the line of black cars waited in silence, their windows reflecting the patched porches and tired lawns of the block as if wealth itself had come to sit down and learn some manners. Miss Delia wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater and pretended she was cold. Mr. Benton cleared his throat and stared at his shovel like it had suddenly become very interesting. A little boy from 2 houses down whispered, "Who is she?" And his mother answered in a voice low but proud enough to carry, "She is the little girl who did not walk away." Amina heard that and felt something open in her chest that had been closed a very long time. Not because people were looking at her. She had never wanted that part. It was because for once they were seeing the right thing. Not her clothes, not her street, not the narrowness of her life. The right thing, the worth of her heart. Grant slipped the phone back into his pocket, then reached into his coat and pulled out one last item. A folded square of fabric. He held it carefully, almost reverently, before offering it up to her. It was the purple scarf, newly cleaned, lightly brushed, the loose yarn mended so neatly Amina almost did not recognize the repaired spot. "My assistant had it fixed," he said, "but I kept one small tear on the inside seam." Amina took it with both hands and looked down. There, hidden near the edge, was the faint little pull in the knit where the frozen window had caught it during the storm. Not erased. Preserved. "Why?" she asked. Grant's answer came without hesitation. "Because some things should not be repaired so perfectly that they forget what they survived." The words sank deep. Miss Loretta closed her eyes for half a second, as if storing them away. Amina wrapped the scarf around her neck, and the wool felt warmer than before, not because it had changed, but because she had. Because everyone standing there had. The winter sun had dropped lower now, catching in the melting snowbanks and the long black hoods of the cars, turning everything gold at the edges. The whole street looked softer in that light, less worn, less overlooked, as if afternoon itself had decided to be gentle. Grant stepped back toward the curb, but not before placing one hand over his heart in a gesture so simple it said more than any speech could. "Thank you," he said. "No title, no grand performance. Just thank you." Amina nodded, unable for a moment to trust her voice. When she finally found it, it came out small but steady. "Call your daughter again tomorrow." A few people smiled through their tears. Grant gave a quiet laugh, the kind that only comes when pride has finally loosened its grip. "I will," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the waiting car, slower than when he arrived, as if leaving required more of him than coming had. Evelyn followed, but glanced back once with an expression that held something like wonder. The doors closed. Engines stirred. One by one, the black sedans rolled down the block and away, their glossy sides carrying the neighborhood's reflection with them until the last one turned the corner and was gone. But the silence they left behind was not empty. It was full of what had been seen, what had been said aloud, what could no longer be denied. Amina stood on the porch between her grandmother and the fading winter light, one hand resting on the scarf at her throat. The street slowly returned to itself. A door shut. A dog barked. A child laughed somewhere in a backyard crusted with old snow. Miss Loretta laid her hand over Amina's shoulder and squeezed gently. Neither of them spoke for a while. They did not need to. Below them, the wet pavement still held the dark impressions of luxury tires. Above them, the sky was turning pale silver. And in the quiet after everything, with the last of the sunlight breathing across the porch boards, Amina understood something she was still too young to put into words, but old enough to feel all the way through. Kindness was not small just because it came from small hands. Sometimes it was the only warm thing in the storm. Sometimes it was the thing that made the powerful kneel. Sometimes it changed a street, a family, a future, without ever raising its voice. She was only 9. She was not rich. She was not important in the ways the world usually counted. But that afternoon, wrapped in a repaired scarf and golden winter light, Amina Brooks stood very still and felt what dignity sounded like when it finally arrived at her door and said her name.